On the 12th of June 2022 in Saint-Jérôme, a small town in Quebec, police received an unusual call. Neighbors complained about a smell coming from the house of Gilles Moreau. Law enforcement discovered something inexplicable there. Gilles Moreau, formerly dead for already 12 years, was found in his own house, sitting on a sofa in a perfectly clean living room. The 12th of June 2022, Sunday. Patrol cars quietly approached an ordinary two-story house on the outskirts of Saint-Jérôme. The street was almost deserted. The summer day, hot even by Canadian standards, aggravated the unpleasant smell that neighbors had reported. The house belonged to Gilles Moreau and his wife Lucy, a quiet family couple whom hardly anyone here knew. No one answered the knock on the door. The police had already received official permission to break in. After several unsuccessful attempts to contact the house residents by phone and through neighbors, a decision was made to enter inside. The house looked absolutely well-maintained from the outside. Bushes neatly trimmed, lawn recently mowed. However, the windows were tightly closed with aluminum foil. Such a detail immediately drew police attention. Why did the owners so carefully protect themselves from the outside world? Officers entered through the back door. It turned out to be unlocked. Inside, they were met by a strange contrast: freshness and cleanliness. In the kitchen, fresh products lay on the table. A receipt from the local supermarket was dated 2 days earlier, the 10th of June 2022. In the cupboard was discovered an enormous quantity of air fresheners, almost 100 units. When they reached the living room, all the absurdity of the situation became obvious. On the sofa, in a strict pose, sat a person. These were the remains of a man, dried and mummified. He looked almost like a statue, so dehydrated and preserved was the body. A forensic specialist later confirmed the identity of the found person. This was Gilles Moreau, the 53-year-old owner of the house. The situation seemed absurd. According to the conclusion of the arriving coroner, Gilles had died approximately 12 years ago. That is, the man had been here in his own house since 2010. Neighbors saw Lucy regularly, but no one could remember Gilles Moreau ever coming out of the house even once in recent years. The first suspicion naturally fell on Lucy Moreau, the spouse, the only one who constantly lived in the house. Lucy was found in the house immediately after the police. She looked confused and disoriented. The woman claimed that she did not know what to do with Gilles when he died many years ago. Her version looked absurd, but so far the police refrained from accusations, carefully recording her every word. At the same time, a neighbor appeared on the street, Etienne Lavoie. Etienne was slightly agitated, but looked naturally curious. He approached one of the officers, and before anyone asked, himself declared that he had seen Gilles Moreau just 3 years ago, in 2019. Allegedly, he was sitting in the yard, alive and unharmed. Etienne's testimony contradicted the expert's conclusion, but the neighbor spoke confidently, not doubting his words. The forensic expert reported an important detail to the police right on the spot. Mummification could not have occurred either yesterday or 3 years ago. Such a condition requires at least a decade of dry and stable climate indoors. This officially excluded the possibility that Etienne Lavoie had seen exactly Gilles in 2019. At this moment, investigators requested outdoor surveillance cameras installed by several neighbors. The recordings confirmed yet another strange detail. Over the past 12 years, no one except Lucy herself had entered or left the house. The quick refutation of Etienne's words became the first closed false lead of the investigation. The house was sealed, but within a few hours, law enforcement began systematic study of the Moreau family's life. Everything around looked suspicious, from Lucy's daily visits to the store to strange financial operations on an account registered to Gilles. By the evening of the 12th of June 2022, police officially confirmed several important facts. First, The discovered man was Gilles Moreau, confirmed officially. Second, Lucy Moreau was the only one who constantly lived in the house for the past 12 years. Third, neighbor Etienne Lavoie's testimony proved false, confirmed by expertise. Fourth, surveillance cameras recorded only Lucy as a visitor and resident of the house since 2010. All this data strengthened police suspicions regarding Lucy. However, the main, still unclear question remained. Why did she need to hide her husband's death for such a long period of time? By the end of the day, the house remained sealed. Investigative actions continued in several directions, including financial investigations and psychiatric examination of Lucy. But the main answers were hidden deeper. Investigators still had much to uncover before they would understand how and why this could have happened in a quiet Canadian town. The 13th of June, 2022. On the investigator's desk, bank statements from the last 12 years are neatly arranged. Attention is focused on details that might shed light on Lucy Moreau's motive. The police are carefully examining the family's accounts. At first glance, this is an ordinary bank account of an elderly couple. Every month there are standard utility payments, small purchases at the grocery store, no large transfers. And only two types of payments raise doubts and require explanations. Consistently, since January 2010, a small amount has been debited from this account for a subscription to the well-known Quebec magazine, La Presse. The subscription is registered in the name of Gilles Moreau. Even stranger are the monthly regular donations to the Canadian Army veterans, also registered in Gilles' name. When Lucy Moreau was invited to the station for questioning, she looked somewhat frightened, but calmly answered questions. The woman was fully aware of the payments, but explained them briefly and confidently. "It's just an auto payment. I didn't even notice. Gilles arranged everything." The police officer pauses, looks closely at the woman and clarifies. "You didn't notice for 12 years?" Lucy's expression doesn't change. She again calmly confirms, "Yes, 12 years. I didn't look at bank statements. They came by mail. I didn't open them. I trusted my husband." The investigators doubt such an answer. This seems illogical, but prosecution requires more than just doubts about her sincerity. Checking the statements showed that they indeed arrived in paper form every month. The police find them at home, neatly folded, sealed, and untouched. At first glance, Lucy's version seems dubious, but formally it's difficult to refute. Then a new investigation hypothesis appears. Perhaps Lucy simply staged that Gilles continued to live in order to receive his pension. This is logical and practical. Many cases of such fraud are well known to police. But this version collapses just a few hours after the first assumption. That same day, an employee of the financial department reports important information. Gilles Moreau's pension indeed arrived monthly, but it was transferred not to Lucy's separate account, but to the couple's joint bank account. Over 12 years, Lucy never withdrew a single cent from these funds. Everything coming into the account remained practically untouched. This information calls into question the version of financial gain as a motive. The woman didn't spend her husband's money, although she had full opportunity to manage it freely. Lucy lived modestly, practically on her own savings and small income from part-time employment, not touching Gilles' funds. The police are again at a dead end. The money that seemingly could have been an obvious motive for such strange behavior was not Lucy's goal. The investigation is forced to reconsider the situation once again. If the financial motive is excluded, why did Lucy so carefully maintain the appearance that Gilles was alive? What did this give her psychologically, if not materially? The police record facts confirm by the end of the day, the pension wasn't spent. There was no financial benefit. Auto payments were active for 12 years without Lucy's participation. Lucy claims she didn't check accounts and didn't know about the debits. Now the investigation must understand more subtle motives. This is no longer simply a case of fraud. This looks like something more personal and complex. The day ends with an additional request to the bank to check in detail the history of these automatic payments' origin. Police officers intend to make sure whether these payments were actually established during Gilles' lifetime or they were set up later. The answer to this request will come later, but investigators are already beginning to suspect that simple answers are absent in this story. Lucy is released home, having been preliminarily warned about the need to remain available. The woman calmly leaves, looking as if detached from everything happening. Meanwhile, investigators begin studying her psychological profile. Perhaps the answers lie not in money, but in her personality. The police begin to realize that this is a story not about greed, but probably about fear and loneliness, which haven't yet manifested clearly but have already begun to make themselves known in small, seemingly insignificant details of her life. While the investigation moves forward, the main question continues to trouble police and all of Saint-Jérôme. What exactly forced Lucy to hide reality for so many years? No one can yet give a definitive answer, but understanding that money has nothing to do with it is already changing the direction of the investigation. Now the investigation's attention turns to Lucy herself, to her inner world and motives that remain deeply hidden from outside eyes. The Moreau family's past hides one detail that might clarify much of what's happening. In March 2010, a loud quarrel occurred between the spouses, so loud that alarmed neighbors called the police. The police sergeant who arrived then on the call recorded the situation as a family quarrel without physical conflict. This wasn't just a domestic dispute. The spouses were shouting at each other about selling the family restaurant, an establishment that had been their only common business and source of income for many years. In the police report, which investigators carefully studied 12 years later, it was noted that Gilles insisted on selling the restaurant due to debts accumulated by 2010. Lucy categorically objected. She considered the restaurant part of their life, a business worth enduring any financial difficulties for. When the police officer asked Lucy whether further conflicts should be expected, she assured, "We settled it. Everything's fine." The spouses appeared to have calmed down, and after a brief conversation, the officer left the house. But in the report, he noted that, in his opinion, tension between them remained high. After that call, neighbors stopped hearing quarrels. More precisely, they stopped hearing anything at all. The Moreau house seemed to fall silent, and neighbors attributed this to reconciliation, usual after a serious quarrel. However, in light of what was discovered 12 years later, this silence acquired an ominous tone. It's logical that investigators quickly came to the assumption perhaps it was after that quarrel that Lucy decided on something more than just a verbal conflict. A version appeared that Lucy might have consciously caused harm to her spouse and then hidden what happened, staging everyday life. To confirm or refute this hypothesis, the investigation sent Gilles' body for examination. The forensic medical team carefully studied the mummified remains, not missing a single detail. The investigation carefully awaited the coroner's conclusion. If Gilles had been murdered, traces should have remained on the remains indicating the violent nature of his departure from life. But the results obtained a few days later surprised everyone and crossed out the murder hypothesis. The coroner officially established that Gilles Moreau died naturally, a heart attack. There were no traces of struggle or any external intervention. The body was preserved perfectly, and this excluded any doubts about the examination results. It was precisely this conclusion that completely excluded Lucy from the list of suspects in her husband's murder. The fact of a natural cause of death was beyond doubt. On one hand, this removed the weight of the most serious suspicions from Lucy, but on the other hand, she still remained guilty of a serious and inexplicable crime, concealing death. The investigation still had no answer to the main question. If Gilles died naturally, why did Lucy hide this for 12 years? Why did a woman living a quiet, inconspicuous life prefer to risk criminal prosecution instead of reporting it in a timely manner? These details posed a complex psychological puzzle for the police officers. The entire city knew Lucy Moreau as a quiet, withdrawn person, but no one could suppose that her withdrawal could lead to such a strange decision. Her calmness during interrogations, the complete absence of panic or attempts to justify herself before the police made the case even more mysterious. With each new stage of the investigation, one thing became obvious. This was not an accident or an impulsive act. Lucy carefully created a system of everyday life in which no one could notice her husband's disappearance. Even small things like subscriptions and donations were paid automatically, maintaining the illusion of Gilles' life. The coroner left no doubt about the natural nature of Gilles Moreau's death. The murder version completely fell away. But the investigation had not yet completely closed the question of her guilt. She was guilty of concealing the truth, of creating a false picture for the entire surrounding world. Now investigators had to figure out the motive for this act. By the end of studying these materials, the police officers recorded final conclusions for themselves. The cause of Gilles' death was a heart attack, officially confirmed by examination. Lucy did not commit a crime against her husband's life. The version of violent death was completely excluded. The question about the reasons for concealment remained open. Lucy's motivation not connected with murder or financial gain. Now the police had to concentrate on Lucy's psychological state. A woman who kept such a secret for 12 years undoubtedly could have deep internal reasons for such behavior. Investigators understood that the answers lay not in evidence and not in bank statements, but deeper, in Lucy herself, in her hidden personal drama that no one in the city even suspected. A week after the coroner established the natural cause of Gilles Moreau's departure, investigators again returned to the house on the outskirts of Saint-Jérôme. All this time, the house remained sealed, and the investigation continued in-depth study of details of the spouse's life. The attention of the operational group was drawn to one detail missed earlier. During a repeated examination of the living room, an officer accidentally noticed a small hole in the chimney of the old fireplace. The space was tight and difficult to access, but something was clearly inside. After brief manipulations, they managed to extract a heavily dusty object from the hole. It turned out to be an old smartphone, a BlackBerry Bold, a popular model in 2010. The device looked long forgotten. The battery had long been discharged, and the case was covered with a thick layer of dust and soot. This phone could contain important information, and therefore it was immediately sent to technical specialists. In the laboratory, criminalists managed to recover data from the device. The phone's memory preserved information about several incoming and outgoing calls and messages. The most remarkable was the last outgoing message sent on the evening of the 12th of March, 2010. The text was short and laconic. "Don't worry." The message recipient remained undefined. The subscriber's number was completely deleted from the phone's memory. Investigators sent a request to the mobile operator to confirm data about Gilles' number. The answer came quickly. The number indeed belonged to Gilles Moreau. The SIM card remained active until the middle of 2011. After that, the operator disconnected the number due to lack of activity and payment. Against the background of this information, the investigation had a new hypothesis. Maybe Gilles planned to leave, abandon Lucy and start a new life in another place. Perhaps it was he who sent this message to calm someone who was waiting for him, and hid the phone in the fireplace to hide traces of his intention. If this version was correct, Lucy could simply be covering up her husband's disappearance, not suspecting that he had actually died naturally, not having carried out his plan. This theory again put Lucy in a difficult position. Not a murderer, but a person who hid her spouse's disappearance, fearing neighbors' condemnation or persecution. However, specialists in digital technology and criminology prepared an unexpected turn for the investigation. They reported that the message, according to the phone's technical logs, was sent after the time of Gilles Moreau's death established by the coroner. This meant one thing. someone else sent the SMS after Gilles was no more. Someone else used the phone that belonged to him. And this unknown person was in the Moreau house during the period between 2010 and 2011. This sharply changed the picture of the investigation. Lucy, logically, could have sent this message. She was the only one who regularly was in the house, but the investigation did not yet have evidence confirming her involvement specifically in sending it. Investigators understood that physical access to the house was available to an extremely limited circle of people. In fact, this could only be Lucy herself or someone who came to the house without being noticed by neighbors. Video surveillance cameras appeared only later, so data capable of confirming the sender's identity did not exist. Thus, Lucy found herself once again under the close attention of the investigation. She was not aware of this fact, remaining outwardly calm and indifferent to the investigation. Officers continued observing her daily habits, noting the absence of any suspicious contacts or nervousness in behavior. The investigation recorded that Gilles' phone was used after his death, but by whom exactly remains unknown. The person who received the last message was also not identified. The phone was carefully hidden, which clearly indicates an attempt to conceal important details. This discovery gave the investigation clarity on one question. The version of Gilles' voluntary disappearance was dismissed, as it was obvious that the man died before the message was sent. But it remained unclear who exactly used the phone after Gilles' death. This was a new turn in the investigation that could provide answers to the question of Lucy Moreau's strange behavior. Why didn't she tell the police about the phone? Why didn't she confess this earlier? This forced the police to delve deeper into Lucy's personality, trying to understand what a woman who had kept such a secret for so long was capable of. The investigation could not be completed until this person who sent the mysterious message was identified. And this meant that investigators once again focused on Lucy Moreau, understanding that now it was not simply about a strange attempt to hide the fact of natural death, but about deeper and potentially disturbing circumstances. In July 2022, the investigation of the Moreau family situation entered a new phase. Investigators focused on Lucy's personality, trying to understand more deeply the motives of her inexplicable behavior. Simultaneously, all available medical information and documentation concerning her mental health was requested. One of the most important documents obtained by the investigation turned out to be a report from a psychotherapist who conducted therapy with Lucy in 2011, a year after Gilles Moreau's departure. The document contained many strange details that could shed light on her unusual actions. In the psychologist's report, Lucy Moreau's condition was classified as unrecognized loss. This means that she was never able to accept the reality of losing a close person, continuing to behave as if this person was still alive. However, this was not simply denial of grief, common for those who have difficulty experiencing loss. The psychotherapist's notes revealed a much more disturbing picture. According to him, the patient clearly demonstrated signs of a double life. She conducted daily conversations with an absent partner, imitating dialogue so naturally that it looked like real communication. The investigator reread this paragraph several times, trying to imagine the scene. Lucy, alone in the house, talking to emptiness, conducting long conversations with a person who wasn't there. This confirmed that her concealment of her husband's departure was not simply an attempt to hide the fact of death from others. She literally lived in a world where her husband was still present. When the investigator directly asked Lucy why she didn't report her spouse's death, at least to the therapist, Lucy only looked at him and remained silent. This silence lasted so long that the investigator understood. Lucy would have no coherent answer. Now the police had to consider a new version of events. If Lucy really suffered from serious mental disorders, recognizing her as insane could completely change the status of the case and remove criminal responsibility from her. This version looked convenient for the defense, but the prosecutor's office immediately issued a harsh statement refuting the probability of mental illness. The prosecutor's representative insisted that Lucy's actions were carefully thought out and had a selfish motive. As proof, the same automatic payments and donations were cited, allegedly confirming Lucy's awareness of her husband's departure and attempts to hide this consciously. These two opposing versions clashed sharply. On one side, severe psychological trauma that forced Lucy to live in an invented reality. On the other, cold calculation and intentional fraud. Lucy found herself at the center of a complex moral and legal conflict, her true intentions still remaining hidden. Police continued careful study of all therapy details. The therapist noted that over several months, Lucy showed no signs of improvement. On the contrary, she became increasingly withdrawn and refused to discuss the very possibility of her spouse's departure. All the therapist's attempts to draw her into frank conversation failed. The psychotherapist's notes also contained an important observation that Lucy regularly attended sessions, accompanied by a notebook where she allegedly recorded her husband's answers and remarks. She conducted not only verbal conversations but also recorded them on paper, maintaining the illusion of full communication with a person who no longer existed physically. Investigators studied all available records and confirmed Lucy consciously maintained the illusion of her spouse's presence at therapy. This was not simply a case of mental disorder. This was a thought-out strategy that the woman followed with frightening precision. Based on this information, the investigation once again checked the version of self-interest. If Lucy was aware of the situation, why did she so long and consistently play the role of a woman living in another reality? Why didn't she try to use the available money for herself? However, the prosecutor's office continued to firmly hold on to the fact of subscription payments and donations, arguing that the very setup of such auto payments indicates her clear consciousness and intentional concealment of reality. The investigation at this stage had several confirmed facts. Lucy consciously imitated her spouse's presence at therapy. She conducted fictitious conversations and records, convincing others that Gilles was alive. Psychiatric examination showed deep rejection of the fact of loss. The version of complete mental illness was discarded. However, it was not completely excluded that Lucy really believed in her invented reality. Now the investigation concentrated on one thing: figuring out where exactly the boundary lies between her illness and her conscious actions. The prosecutor's office insisted on intentional fraud. The defense, on the contrary, led to the conclusion that Lucy was a hostage of her inner world and could not control her own actions. Investigators were forced to balance between these versions, trying to understand how far a woman who had lost connection with reality could go. Lucy continued to remain silent, not giving clear explanations, and the investigation was at a dead end that became more complex with each new discovery. On the 5th of July 2022, the case of Gilles and Lucy Moreau took a new turn. This time, the key was not an interrogation or search, but a court filing. It was submitted by Gilles Moreau's sons from his first marriage. Their lawyer officially notified the authorities that they intended to claim their father's inheritance. The statement surprised the investigation. The sons, by their own admission, had not communicated with Gilles since 2008. This fact seemed simple and verified. However, the son's lawyer insisted on his position and presented the court with documents that surprised everyone. These documents turned out to be electronic correspondence allegedly sent by Gilles in the period from 2012 to 2020. The letters contained birthday congratulations and other important events, which directly testified that Gilles, at least formally, maintained contact with the children after 2010. Investigators took the correspondence for verification and quickly discovered its source. The IP address from which these letters were sent belonged to the Moreau house. Moreover, the letters were sent from the home Wi-Fi network registered directly in Gilles Moreau's name. This circumstance seemed absurd and contradictory at the same time. If Gilles was gone back in 2010, who exactly was sending these letters? Gilles' sons immediately drew attention to the Moreau's neighbor, Etienne Lavoie. In their opinion, he could have had access to the house's Wi-Fi through friendship and sent such messages for some personal benefit or simply as a joke. At that moment, the investigation returned to Etienne, who had already been checked earlier. Etienne was interrogated again. However, he confidently denied that he had ever connected to the neighbor's network. Moreover, he insisted that he was not close enough to Gilles and Lucy to have such access at all. To finally figure it out, the police turned to technical verification of the Moreau's home router logs. The Wi-Fi logs confirmed that Etienne indeed never connected to the Moreau house network, even once during all the years of the device's existence. Consequently, the version involving Etienne was temporarily dismissed. However, the logs revealed another surprise. All electronic letters were sent exclusively from Lucy Moreau's devices. This was the first clear technical trace directly linking Lucy to conscious forgery of contacts on Gilles' behalf. Now investigators faced an extremely ambiguous situation. Lucy, who lived reclusively and inconspicuously, obviously created an entire world in which her husband continued to exist not only for her, but also for external people, including his sons. The prosecutor's office was convinced that this circumstance clearly indicated intentional deception aimed at retaining inheritance and control over Gilles' assets. This argument could completely exclude the version of Lucy's mental illness and testify to her complete understanding of what was happening and intentional actions. The lawyer for Gilles' sons demanded full recognition of their right to inheritance. They accused Lucy of conscious fraud and manipulation. From the lawyer's point of view, this was Lucy's attempt to hide the true state of affairs and preserve for herself property that, by law, after the father's death, should have been managed by first-line heirs. These new facts were carefully studied by investigators in the prosecutor's office. On one hand, Lucy never spent her husband's pension and generally did not try to use his financial resources for personal enrichment. On the other hand, her attempt to imitate Gilles' life for so many years no longer looked like harmless, strange behavior, but like a thought-out strategy. The investigation at this point recorded several important conclusions. Electronic correspondence with Gilles' sons was completely forged. Etienne Lavoie had no relation to the letters and did not connect to the Moreau house network. All electronica. Messages were sent from Lucy Moreau's devices. Thus, the investigation's focus now definitively shifted to Lucy's motives. Clarity on the question of financial benefit remained disputed. Lucy did not spend money, but perhaps held control over the inheritance for other considerations that remained unclear for now. The prosecutor's office prepared to prove that Lucy acted consciously and intentionally. On the other hand, the defense continued to insist on her mental state, emphasizing the unusualness of her behavior and the absence of real benefit from her actions. This entire situation looked extremely confusing and posed the most complex question to the court about the nature of Lucy Moreau's motive. Lucy continued to remain silent, refusing to comment on her actions. Each new day in the house was similar to the previous one, calm and quiet, as if she was not aware of the seriousness of what was happening. The investigation found itself at another crossroads. Was Lucy a cunning fraudster who systematically maintained the illusion of her husband's life? Or a deeply traumatized woman stuck so deeply in her invented world that she could no longer distinguish it from reality? This dilemma became the central theme, and it was at this stage that the investigation reached a new dead end, from which an exit had to be found to fully reveal Lucy Moreau's motives. On the 18th of July 2022, the investigation receives the final report from forensic experts. The document contains one important clarification that had not previously figured in the case. According to the conclusion, Gilles Moreau's remains were moved at least once after his departure from life. Experts noticed traces of a small drag, about 30 centimeters long. Visually, this seemed insignificant, but for the investigation, it became extremely important. This meant that Lucy Moreau physically interacted with her husband's remains after his departure. Police immediately went to the Moreau house again to conduct an even more detailed examination. Forensic specialists carefully investigated the floor and furniture of the living room where Gilles' remains were initially discovered. Under a microscope, small chips were found on the parquet, and in them remains of long-dried blood. These microcracks and blood traces confirmed that the movement occurred right here, and judging by DNA analysis, this blood belonged to Gilles. But most importantly, Lucy Moreau's DNA was also found on these traces. This became irrefutable proof of her physical contact with her husband's remains after his departure. When the investigator presented these results to Lucy and demanded explanations, she didn't change her expression and calmly confessed to the fact of movement. The woman briefly said, "I wanted to lay him more comfortably, but accidentally dropped him." These words sounded strange, even eerie, and the investigator immediately suspected possible violence or intentional harm. Perhaps Lucy was trying to hide something more than just her husband's natural departure from life. This version was thoroughly checked. Investigators again turned to pathologists for a deeper conclusion about the nature of blood traces and possible damage on Gilles Moreau's remains. The examination took several days, but the results were unambiguous. Pathologists confidently stated the blood traces appeared after Gilles' heart had stopped. This was post-mortem blood, appearing during natural processes of tissue change, during initial autolysis, which can sometimes manifest in small quantities and does not indicate external violence or damage. Thus, the version of violence was finally rejected. The investigation was forced to acknowledge that movement indeed occurred, but without any intentional harm. Lucy simply tried to somehow arrange her husband's remains, possibly guided by her strange ideas about care and respect. However, despite the clarity of the examination, the investigation had an enormous question remaining that still had no answer. Why did Lucy Moreau hide her husband's death for 12 years? Why did a woman who committed no crime against life take such a difficult step and prefer to keep this secret? Police again turned to psychologists, trying to gain deeper understanding of Lucy's behavior. Psychologists confirmed that although Lucy could be in a state of deep denial and illusions, this did not mean complete loss of contact with reality. She clearly understood the consequences of her actions, even if the reasons for her behavior remained hidden. By the end of this stage of investigation, investigators finally established that Gilles' remains were moved, but there was no violence. Lucy confirmed the fact of movement. The pathologist excluded the version of causing harm or any external violence. The version of murder or violence was completely closed and officially discarded. One heavy and tormented suspicion remained, which had been troubling the investigation and the city for several weeks already. Why had Lucy remained silent for 12 years? Now, police understood that the motive could only be found in one way: trying to understand Lucy's inner world, her fears, and her personal drama, which she had carefully hidden from everyone around her for many years. Lucy continued to behave as if nothing had happened. Every day, she quietly went out to the garden, maintained order in the house, avoiding any conversations about the past. Her daily actions were like a ritual that she performed with habitual precision, showing no signs of anxiety or fear about possible consequences. Nevertheless, the investigation could not ignore the fact of concealment, which, even without violence, remained a serious violation of law. Lucy knew that she faced punishment for this, but continued to remain silent, unwilling or unable to explain the reasons for her action. By this point, all other versions had already exhausted themselves. One major secret remained: Lucy Moreau's motive. And this was the last link that still needed to be revealed to finally complete this confusing investigation. On the 10th of November 2022, in the courtroom in Montreal, people gather who have closely followed the Moreau family story for recent months. Lucy sits calmly, almost motionless, her face expressing absolute detachment. Today, they will announce the conclusion of the forensic psychiatric examination appointed by the court to determine her mental state and motives. The expert psychiatrist slowly reads his conclusion, carefully selecting each word. The diagnosis announced before the court sounds official and clear: complex of pathological denial of loss. This is a known phenomenon in which a person, faced with tragic loss, literally refuses to acknowledge it, creating their own reality in which the lost person continues to exist. During Lucy's psychiatric examination, experts revealed that she not only denied her husband's departure, but also completely adapted to her illusion. According to the conclusion, her actions pursued no material benefit. She lived in a constant psychological construction of her spouse's presence, maintaining the illusion through conversations, letters, and even financial operations. The experts separately emphasized that Lucy's behavior cannot be called completely unconscious or insane. The woman clearly understood reality and the consequences of her actions, but could not or would not step beyond the psychological construction she had created herself. From a psychiatric perspective, Lucy was in a state of borderline disorder, serious enough to explain her actions, but not severe enough to completely free her from responsibility. The prosecutor's office, however, was not intending to surrender its positions. The prosecutor's representative again insisted that all of Lucy's actions were dictated exclusively by fear of losing income and control over her husband's property. He demanded that the court find her guilty of conscious deception and fraud, despite the psychiatrist's conclusion. The prosecutor argued this by saying that Lucy had sufficient clarity of consciousness to set up automatic payments and falsify electronic correspondence. He insisted that these actions testified to her complete awareness and intentional desire to hide her husband's departure for the sake of maintaining a stable financial position. The judge listened to both sides restrainedly and attentively, showing no emotions. The examination indeed provided strong arguments in Lucy's defense, but the prosecutor's arguments could not be completely ignored. Finally, the court gave the floor to Lucy herself. Everyone expected from her at least some clarification of motive, some emotion, some reaction. But the woman remained calm and detached, as if completely removed from what was happening around her. Lucy's voice sounded even almost without emotion. She said only one thing: "I heard him breathing." Every night, absolute silence fell in the courtroom. This phrase was so unexpected and so eerie in its simplicity and calmness that even the prosecutor did not immediately find an answer. Lucy looked completely normal, rational, and at the same time completely confident in her words. The judge announced a recess, after which the verdict was to be announced. Everyone present understood. Regardless of the legal outcome of the case, Lucy would never be the same again. One thing was obvious to everyone. Her reality was stuck on the day her husband died. And it was precisely this illusion that controlled all her actions for 12 years. The investigation fully confirmed Lucy's non-material motive. Psychologists and psychiatrists agreed that her behavior was not an attempt at fraud, but a complex and tragic consequence of deep emotional shock and inability to accept reality. In the final summary, the investigation recorded key conclusions. Lucy Moreau indeed suffered from a serious psychological disorder related to non-acceptance of loss. Material gain was not her goal. Forensic psychiatric examination fully confirmed the non-material motive. At the same time, legally the charge of fraud had not yet been completely dropped. It remained to wait for the court's final decision. But no one could doubt any longer that beneath the mask of Lucy's strange behavior lay the tragedy of a woman who could never come to terms with reality. This final stage of the investigation forced everyone to see the story of Lucy and Gilles Moreau completely differently. What began as suspicion of a crime turned into a sad realization of how deeply a person can go when trying to hold on to a departed past. Lucy continued to sit quietly and calmly, as if the words that had just been spoken no longer concerned her. The judge withdrew to make a decision, and everyone understood that this moment would become the final point in the Moreau family story. The last court session took place in a cold and silent atmosphere. People in the hall had long understood that this story was not about crime for profit, but about personal tragedy that turned into absurdity and ultimately into a criminal case. The judge slowly and calmly read the verdict, bringing together all parts of the case. Gilles Moreau's death occurred as a result of a heart attack on the 14th of March 2010. Experts confirmed that this happened approximately 48 hours before Lucy began creating the appearance of his active life. Psychiatric examination confirmed that Lucy Moreau suffered from a severe disorder, a complex of pathological denial of loss. She could not accept her husband's death, so she left his remains in the house and began actively imitating his presence, creating digital noise to make life appear normal from the outside. Officially, the court revealed the motive and method of concealment. Lucy set up automatic payments for magazine subscription and regular donations, imitating Gilles' activity so that the bank would not block their joint account. The court confirmed that she indeed sent messages and emails on behalf of her husband, maintaining the illusion of his life for others. One of the last messages from the 12th of March 2010 was sent by Lucy to calm Gilles' sister, who had begun to worry about his condition. The fact of moving the remains was also officially confirmed. Lucy tried to seat her deceased husband in his usual position in front of the television, deliberately creating the illusion that he was still alive and leading ordinary domestic life. The prosecutor asked the court to find Lucy guilty of conscious concealment of death and impose a sentence of 3 years suspended. He argued this by the fact that, despite her severe psychological condition, the woman clearly understood the consequences of her actions and consciously concealed the fact of Gilles' death for many years. Lucy's lawyer insisted on complete acquittal, emphasizing that her actions were exclusively the result of severe psychological trauma and that she pursued no selfish goals. He stated that Lucy needed not punishment, but treatment and psychological help. After a long silence, the judge announced his final verdict. Lucy Moreau was found guilty of concealing death. The court sentenced her to 24 months suspended with mandatory psychotherapy. Lucy received this without the slightest emotion. The judge asked her if she wanted to add anything finally. The woman calmly, without any excitement, looked directly into the camera installed in the courtroom. Her gaze lasted exactly 10 seconds, full of absolute emptiness and silence. Then she calmly said only one word: "No." After this, the session was closed. Lucy left the hall as calmly as she had entered it throughout all months of hearings. Nothing seemed to have changed in her life, but everyone present understood that a completely different reality now awaited her. The Moreau house was officially sealed and became a symbol of a strange, quiet tragedy. In the living room, there still stood an empty sofa where Gilles had spent many years, remaining unnoticed by the world. The last shot that the camera in the courtroom captured was precisely this: an empty sofa in a dark living room, surrounded by silence. After a few seconds, the screen completely darkened, leaving no epilogue or moral. Simply a final, cold point in a story that began with a heart attack and ended with court and verdict. The investigation confirmed 100%. The cause of Gilles Moreau's death was natural causes. Heart attack. Lucy consciously concealed the death, maintaining digital and financial activities on his behalf. Etienne Lavoie was completely exonerated and cleared of suspicion of involvement. Only one question remained that experts could not resolve: the exact time of Gilles' departure, since mummification made it impossible to determine this to the minute. But for the case, this no longer mattered. The judicial process and investigation were completed. People who had been following this story slowly dispersed from the courtroom, silently and thoughtfully. The Moreau family story became not an example of crime or punishment, but a deeply personal drama that the entire city witnessed. The house itself remained closed and lifeless, symbolizing the completion of a story where the boundary between life and death was washed away by the madness and loneliness of one person. No one else crossed the threshold of the Moreau house, and no one tried to understand or change what happened in March 2010. This was a cold, silent final point. 5 people were found in a barn of a large farm, and $500,000 has disappeared without a trace. On the ground lies farm owner James Flint, with his own shotgun in his hands. The police hurry to document what happened as a family tragedy, but already the first evidence shows that everything is much more complicated than it appears at first glance. On the 7th of October 2021, at 12:38 in the afternoon, school bus driver Andrew Green calls the emergency services. He is troubled by the unusual silence on the Flint family farm. Normally, James Flint's children wait for the bus every day at 7:45 in the morning on the country road. But today, the road is empty. After 14 minutes, a police patrol arrives at the farm. Everywhere, there is emptiness and absence of people. The large grain storage stands open. Inside are the remains of 5 people. They are James Flint, his wife Sarah, the eldest son Joshua, daughter Emma, and the youngest, 9-year-old Ben. All have gunshot wounds from a 12-gauge shotgun from less than 1 meter distance. Next to James lies on the concrete floor his own Winchester SXP shotgun, officially registered in his name. The police immediately document the version of a family tragedy in official report number 21-100-1778. But already the first collected evidence suggests that hasty conclusions could be wrong. The criminal investigators carefully examine the cartridge cases found at the crime scene. On the primers, micro defects from the weapon's firing pin can be clearly distinguished. The expertise quickly determines that these defects do not match the Winchester shotgun that belonged to James Flint. Simply put, shots were fired with a different weapon that is not present at the crime scene. Simultaneously, the police begin reviewing the surveillance camera recordings installed at the barn entrance. The camera shows how at 3:57 at night, someone enters using a magnetic card with code ID 04A7D3. Checking the farm protocol shows that this pass belongs to driver Victor Hoffman. Victor is a seasonal worker who never missed a shift, but exactly today is no longer reachable. The farm's neighbor, Carl Mitchell, who lives less than 1 kilometer from the Flints, tells the police officers another important detail. At 5:15 in the morning, he clearly heard the sound of a running grain auger. At this time of day, grain harvesting never began. Carl wondered about the early activity but did not attach great importance to it until the police arrived. Based on the collected information, the police identify the first suspects. Carl Mitchell, neighbor of the Flint family. He recently lost a court case against James Flint over a dispute about water access. The conflict was considered closed, but the police know of his dissatisfaction with the case outcome. Victor Hoffman, seasonal farm worker. His pass was used to enter the barn at night, shortly before the presumed time of the tragedy. The sudden disappearance and absence from work raise big questions. On the same morning, a tourist named Alan Graham approaches the police and reports that at 4:20 in the morning, he saw Carl Mitchell's blue pickup at the Flint farm's grain silos. Carl himself denies that he was there at that time. This point is documented by the police for now and will be verified. The preliminary expert opinion completely changes the picture of the incident. Judging by the condition of the remains, the tragedy occurred much earlier than the call to emergency services. Between the crime itself and its discovery lie almost 8 hours of absolute inactivity and silence on the farm. The police must acknowledge that the initially obvious version is rapidly losing weight. The investigation quickly narrows the circle of suspects. After the first examination of the crime scene in the grain barn, the police direct their attention to the nearest neighbor, Carl Mitchell. The relationships between him and the Flint family have long ceased to be friendly. The officers begin working through the details of his possible involvement. Why does Carl Mitchell claim that he was not at the farm at 4:20 when tourist Alan Graham clearly saw his blue pickup at the grain silos? But the ATM CCTV camera registered Carl at 6:47 in the morning of the same day, 36 kilometers away in the town of Northam? The situation is confusing at first glance. The investigators must carefully check his movements to confirm Carl or exclude him from the list of suspects. The tourist's statements could have quickly closed this case if not for one detail. Carl clearly proves that he has an alibi for the early morning. Carl calmly informs the police officers that at 4:35 in the morning, he left his house toward Northam with his pickup. For confirmation, Carl shows a Fuel Co. gas station receipt that he received with cashless payment at 4:40 in the morning. A documentarily confirmed fact. The police officers immediately understand that if Carl really fueled his car at 4:40, he could not have been at the farm at 4:20 as the tourist claimed. A time gap emerges that needs clarification. The investigators move to the next detail. Carl had previously reported that at 5:05 he clearly heard the work of the grain auger on the Flint farm when he was still at home. The officers conduct an immediate check of weather conditions. According to the weather report, on the night of the 7th of October, the wind blew from the southeast at a speed of 9 meters per second. The sound of the grain auger of about 95 decibels at a distance of 200 meters could indeed be heard through the open window of Carl's bedroom. The check confirms that he could hear this sound. However, it remains unclear why Carl, who claims to have heard the auger only after his return from Northam, mentions no other movements between 4:40 and 5:05. The time window from 4:20 to 4:55 has no complete explanation. Carl is not nervous but also does not hurry to give details. Meanwhile, the criminal investigators finish searching Carl's belongings, which was conducted with his voluntary consent without a search warrant. On the sole of his boots, remains of grain of the variety Infinity Gold are found, exactly the variety that is marked as missing in the Flint Farms accounting system. This significantly complicates Carl's position. For now, he only shrugs and claims that the grain could have stuck to the soles at any time since he lives very close to the storage facilities. The experts document the find, but understand that this is not enough for an official charge, especially since it is still unknown how exactly the grain disappeared from the farm and why the Flint Farms cash register was empty. The investigation receives an additional recording that could change the direction of the case. At 4 in the morning of the same day, a drone from the company Fix Harvest conducted a planned flyover of fields and agricultural facilities. The footage from its camera clearly shows Carl Mitchell's Toyota Hilux parked at the silos. This confirms the words of the tourist who had previously claimed the same. But Carl himself is not visible in the footage, only his car standing motionless in the darkness next to the grain storage. The investigators study the footage attentively and watch the video several times. The drone is reliable, the camera quality, and there are no doubts about authenticity. But the timestamp 4:00 does not match Carl's proven alibi, which was already confirmed by refueling at 4:40 in the other direction. The police silently document this strange fact. No one immediately draws conclusions, but the investigators begin to allow for the possibility of an error or manipulation of time data on one of the devices. The time question now becomes key to the entire investigation. The next day, the investigation changes its focus. While experts clarify Carl's alibi, another group of police and auditors examines the financial situation of the Flint family farm. The police are certain that the disappearance of a large sum of money and grain cannot be a random coincidence. How did 6 large wheat shipments, with a total weight of 360 tons and a value of almost $500,000 Australian dollars, disappear from the Flint Farms accounting in one season? And why didn't the farmer notice such a serious shortage? The economic experts checking the farm's documentation soon understand the scale of what happened. 6 grain shipments of 60 tons each, with a total value of about $480,000, disappeared without any official write-off. Such a loss obviously goes beyond the scope of a simple accounting error. During detailed verification, the IT auditor finds a hidden cryptocurrency wallet in the farm's network. Regular funds came into this wallet from June to September 2021. A total of 6 transactions were carried out, each exactly for 80,000 Australian dollars. Together, this is the same 480,000 that matches the sum of the grain shortage. Verification of Binance cryptocurrency exchange data confirms that the IP address from which the transfers were made is directly connected to the Flint farm router. This data excludes external interference and shows that the transactions were carried out by someone from inside, a person who had access to the farm's router. Now it's obvious that someone from the workers or people close to the farmer secretly withdrew money. The investigation deepens into analysis of production reports from the Fix Harvest Company, which dealt with transporting the Flint family's grain. The company's chief economist explains to police that according to their documents, about 8% of the farm's entire harvest was written off as losses during transport and storage. This figure significantly exceeds the usual indicator for other enterprises in the region, where the standard of losses rarely exceeds 2%. Police officers examine the correspondence of Sarah Flint, the farmer's wife. On the 17th of September, she sent a message to colleagues on the farm that now looks suspicious. She wrote, "Someone is constantly cutting our norm. Victor swears that the grain in the hopper was sweating, but I'm already doubting." This means that Sarah was informed about the problem long before the tragedy and began to suspect one of the employees, driver Victor Hoffman. Hoffman becomes a figure of interest for police again. His words about the grain allegedly spoiling during the storage process now look either like an honest mistake or like part of a carefully planned scheme. Police develop a preliminary version that James Flint himself was involved in illegal grain sales and could have independently withdrawn money in cryptocurrency. Perhaps he intentionally did not document these operations in the accounting, and when the situation got out of control and became obvious, he decided on extreme measures and organized the tragedy in the barn. At present, police do not have enough evidence to either confirm or refute this version. It remains only a preliminary assumption of the investigation. That same morning, police received the final expert opinion from the forensic expert who worked at the crime scene. Careful examination of James Flint's wound shows an unusual entry angle of the shotgun blast, 62 degrees downward and to the left. The expert clearly indicates that with an independent shot by a right-handed person with a short barrel, such an angle is impossible to achieve. This fact completely refutes the original official version. Now it becomes obvious to police that the tragedy in the barn was a staging planned by someone else. James Flint, originally portrayed as the main culprit, now officially becomes the victim. The investigation returns again to the circle of suspects, among whom are Carl Mitchell and driver Victor Hoffman. The motive is now obviously financial, but drawing concrete conclusions is still too early. 2 months after the tragedy, Victor Hoffman returns to the area and again takes seasonal work as a driver. Police immediately obtain arrest warrant number 21-1180 for his arrest and summons for official questioning. Victor comes voluntarily, behaves calmly and confidently as if he doesn't doubt his own innocence. Why do the micro defects on the shells from the crime scene match the Browning BPS model shotgun that Victor Hoffman had sold through the Perth Shooting Association Sports Club a month before the events? Investigators finally received the ballistic expertise. Until this point, the Perth Forensic State Laboratory had been shut down due to corona quarantine measures and was overloaded with ongoing cases. Now the results are ready and become known to investigators only in mid-December. The ballistics experts give a clear conclusion. The micro-defects on the primers of the shells found on the farm completely match the characteristic traces left by the Browning BPS smoothbore shotgun. According to official data from the Perth Shooting Association, Victor Hoffman indeed owned such a weapon and came personally on the 2nd of September 2021 to the club facility for inspection and preparation of the weapon for Saleh. However, when police present Victor with these facts, he shows no confusion. Instead, he reports that he sold the shotgun through a private deal about a month before the tragedy. The details of the deal are confirmed by the club, where the weapon was officially offered for sale. During official questioning under oath, Victor Hoffman tells the investigation his version. According to his words, the Browning BPS shotgun disappeared from his truck on the night of the 15th of September. He assures that immediately after the disappearance he tried to find the weapon independently, but filed no reports with police or the insurance company. Thus, there is no official confirmation of weapon loss by Victor, and his version remains only his personal statements. Police are not rushing to believe this story. However, they so far have no direct evidence that Victor is telling lies. This leaves him a small opportunity to convincingly explain why shells fired from his former shotgun were at the crime scene. Parallel to this, another group of investigators officially closes the question of neighbor Carl Mitchell's involvement. Tourist Alan Graham, who previously insisted on seeing Carl's pickup at 4:20 in the morning at the Celios, clarifies his statements. During repeated questioning, he confidently identifies the car by the specific nighttime lighting of the truck bed that is installed exactly on Carl's pickup. But after thorough verification of Fix Harvest Company's drone data, a serious error is uncovered. The timestamp 400 on the video turned out to be the result of an NTP server error. Actually, Carl's car was recorded at 600. This completely matches Carl's previously documented alibi. Thus, Carl Mitchell is officially excluded from the suspects in this case. While Victor gives his statements, experts finish deep analysis of electronic information confiscated in the first days after the tragedy. Investigators carefully check technical data from Victor Hoffman's tablet, which was confiscated on the 8th of October. When comparing the device's MAC address with the DHCP dump from the Flint Farm router, investigators obtain a convincing match. According to the obtained data, exactly Victor's tablet was connected to the farm's network at the moments when the 6 secret transactions to the cryptocurrency wallet were carried out. Now the financial traces of the crime are directly connected to Victor's personal device. The financial and ballistic traces begin to converge on one person. The investigation enters the final phase. The police now have only one question left to answer that remains unexplained. How could Victor, unnoticed, take away 360 tons of grain from the farm and leave the crime scene long before dawn? While in the official CCTV records, he appeared in the neighboring town only around 6 o'clock in the morning. The session hall of the Supreme Court of Perth is overcrowded. 1.5 years of investigations, studying evidence, interrogations, and endless expert examinations have come to an end. Victor Hoffman, seasonal driver of Flint Farm, stands before the jury without a single emotion on his face and listens to the prosecution's closing argument. The prosecutor begins confidently to present the chronology of the crime, supporting every word with official documents and evidence. First, Victor prepared the crime in advance by making a duplicate of the magnetic key to the barn already in winter 2020. The access system only registered the ID number of the card. Therefore, the identity of the person entering could not be quickly determined. He used exactly this key on the morning of the 7th of October at 3:57, not suspecting that his entry would be registered by the video surveillance system. Second, Victor woke James Flint, the farm owner, under the pretext of urgent repair of the grain auger. James left the house to deal with the equipment. Thus, Victor obtained the opportunity to control the situation. Third, at 4:12, Victor manually started the combine harvester directly from the cabin. The loud noise of the auger with a power of over 100 decibels completely drowned out the gunshot sounds. At this moment, none of the neighbors could hear what was happening. Fourth, Victor forced the entire family to go into the grain barn, after which he fired several shots from the Browning BPS shotgun. Then Victor placed his own Winchester in James's hand and staged a tragedy that was supposed to confuse the investigation. Fifth, the Kenworth T409 truck, prepared in advance, was preheated and waiting in the area next to the farm. Victor possessed an MC license that allowed him to drive heavy semi-trailers. He quickly loaded the last grain batch of the Infinity Gold variety weighing 37 tons and left the farm before dawn. According to GPS protocols, Victor had already transported 6 previous batches of 60 tons each in the period from June to September. This data is confirmed by satellite protocols of the Fix Farm Truck Company. Sixth, Victor delivered the grain to the Darwin bulk elevator after covering a distance of 92 kilometers on the country road in 1 hour and 40 minutes. He personally signed the freight bill and received money for this batch, which, like the 6 previous payments, was converted into USDT cryptocurrency. Thus, the total amount of stolen grain was almost 480,000 Australian dollars, of which 360 tons are the 6 previous batches and the last 37 tons that were transported away on the night of the tragedy. The prosecutor supports the accusation with irrefutable evidence. The ballistic expertise definitively confirmed the match of microscopic defects of the shells at the crime scene with Victor's Browning BPS shotgun. The delay of the expertise was caused by restrictions on the work of the Perth Forensic State Laboratory due to the pandemic, confirmed by an official document. The DHCP dump of the farm router clearly registered the MAC address of Victor's tablet during all 6 nighttime USDT transactions. A document was found that confirms that Carl Mitchell helped Victor load one of the grain batches in August 2021, which explains the grain traces on his shoes. When the evidence already seems obvious, Victor's lawyers try to challenge the electronic evidence, claiming possible falsification of the MAC address. In response, an expert from Cisco Company invited by the prosecution demonstrates in detail to the court the complete technical dumps of the router. He confirms the data is genuine, was not edited, and was already fully stored in October 2021. After this explanation, the jury withdraws for deliberation. After 3 tense hours, the court returns to session. The judge announces the verdict. Victor Hoffman is found guilty in all 5 episodes of murder, as well as in the serious theft of farm property. The judge pronounces the final sentence. Victor Hoffman is sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to early release.